Welcome, everyone. This is the BioFi Community of Practice, and today we have a deep dive with our friend Stephan Martineau from SANE. And I'm going to drop the BioFi Community of Practice purpose here in the chat. Let's see, I'm admitting people and leading the call today. So let's see if I can do it all. The purpose of the BioFi community of practice is to cultivate and support a global community of practitioners who are designing, capitalizing, implementing, and evolving bioregional financing facilities through peer-to-peer learning and coordination. So that is what many of us here are working on, and many other people are playing roles in support of that. But I was telling Steph that this is a group that is pretty deep in the world of regenerative economics and regenerative finance, and a perfect community, I would say, to hear about Steph's ideas that he's been working on in his new book, which he is going to tell us more about shortly. So let me give a bit of context to set the stage, and then I'll hand it over to Steph to share a bit about regenerative economic zones and how he's thinking about these in his new book and any experiments in this realm that he's working on. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion today. So Steph is representing an organization called SANE, and Steph stewards SANE with his amazing partner Miriam, who's a friend of Tyler and I's. Miriam's with us today too. And SANE is developing a toolkit for pilot projects that demonstrate how a regenerative economy can rewrite the essential conversation between humans and the earth. They are building upon the special economic zone framework to create a regenerative economic zone template. And in Steph's forthcoming book, Reimagining Civilization, a roadmap to a sane future, he lays out existing economic policy that can enable the creation of regulatory sandboxes for regenerative economic activity around the world. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. Steph's lifelong passion and pursuit is to move beyond ideas, discussions, and theorizing to actual implementation of what he refers to as meta-systemic solutions to the meta crisis, with a special focus on creating a new decentralized economy that incentivizes regeneration and bioregional resiliency. Welcome, Steph. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today. And yeah, please share about your work and how it's unfolding and how teams that are working on creating bioregional economies, bioregional financial institutions can maybe take some of your learnings and pilot them in their own bioregions.
Right. Thanks so much, Samantha and Tyler, for the invite. I feel honored to be with all of you today. And I just want to begin by acknowledging all the work that you're all doing in your own bioregions and around the world. I think we all feel like we're experiencing challenging times as a human family, and that a lot of the things that we've been focusing on, sometimes I feel for the last 4 decades in my life, but for as a society, like the last 6 decades, it feels like we've really been starting to feel how we're touching the limits as a human family. And it feels like millions of people have been doing amazing work for those decades, and that we find ourselves in 2026 and we're still feeling like we're not getting headwinds, and that the mountain that we're trying to climb is very steep. So I look forward to sharing with you today and to especially to conversing and to having the Q&A section where we can start exploring together what we can do at this time in history to move the needle in the right direction. My daughter, it's 24 years ago, Miriam and I took a 1 year leave of absence and we traveled the world. And at the time, we asked ourselves what the next step was for humans. That was our question that we traveled the world with. And um, during that 1 year travel pilgrimage, we ended up on an island in Patmos in Greece, and that's where it is said that John wrote the Revelation book of the Bible. And we spent a month there having an amazing time. And our daughter was conceived on that island. And just before this call started, she sent me a text and she said that she had just arrived on Patmos. She's currently traveling in Greece. So it's auspicious in a way that we're here together and that my daughter is completing a full circle, and she is back where she was conceived, which is where John wrote the Revelation. So, anyways, I don't know how that fits
cool.
today. It's a cool little side story to the journey. I just came back from 4 weeks in Europe, and it was really hot. I don't know how many Europeans are in the room today, but we're experiencing extreme heat. Came back to the Kootenays here, and we're smelling a little bit of smoke from wildfires. So it feels that as you move around the world, you're feeling the intensity of our time, and I'm 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 feeling what we're experiencing as a human family, and all of our work for the last four decades has been trying to address this. And so maybe the best way for me to start today is to tell a few stories, very short stories, and I think we can use those stories for the conversation that we will have together. So in 1992, so that dates me a little bit, I moved to this bioregion. The idea at the time was I was going to be a founder of an eco village, which I did. We bought 160 acres of land and began the process of building eco village with a bunch of people. Literally 3 weeks after moving on the land, we received a letter from a local international corporation that had tenure in our valley to say that they were going to clear cut 3 sides of the land that we had just bought that was surrounded by crown land. At the time, it came as a shock that these things could actually happen, and I had not perceived that possibility. So this really began a journey for us of trying to see how we could change the perspective around forestry in our bioregion. So we joined the local organizations, worked for 3 years on creating an alternative possibility for the valley. At the time, our mentor, Herb Ammon, was developing ecosystem-based management, which is now being taught in many schools around the world. And we proposed a solution to the government, to reimagine what managing the forests in this land base could look like. And 2 volumes, 1,000 pages, maps, everything, presented to government, support from many organizations locally. And once we presented it to the government, it was refused right away. And the corporation was told to go ahead and start clear cutting. They began in different watersheds in the valley, and what ensued was protests and blockades and residents arrest. Over 125 residents were arrested, standing for what they believe was not a right approach to ecosystem-based management. And we worked on this for about 8 years. And during those 8 years, they began logging in 4 of the different watersheds in the valley. After 8 years, something completely out of the blue happened. The U.S. government wanted to renegotiate the softwood lumber agreements between Canada and the U.S. And through that negotiation, there was an agreement that was struck that required tenure reallocation to satisfy some of the U.S. demand. That created a crack. And the reason I'm bringing this example is because we're going to talk about cracks in the system in this talk. That created a crack, and that crack was basically not something, it was not about ecosystem-based management, it was not about protecting water, it was not about respecting residents' wishes, it was not about a good vision for the future. It was something that the system had in place that allowed us to refocus our energy, slip through the crack, and get tenure of the land base. So in 2007, we were given tenure of the land base in the Slocan Valley. We formed a community forest. And the reason I'm bringing this up is as soon as we received tenure, and I've been the manager of the community forest since, as soon as we received tenure, within 5 minutes, I was able to protect all of the old growth in the Slocan Valley. I was inside the system around a already agreed tenure agreement with the government. And because I had found the crack, we were able to do and implement the things that we were wishing that we had worked during those 8 years to be able to get the government to do. We were able to do it ourselves. So what that taught me is that finding cracks in the system is super important for transformation. The second example that I want to maybe talk about briefly is zooming out on the bioregion where we live. It's a very special place. Amazing people have moved here over the last 5 decades. And we've been able to achieve so much. If you look at it from the hopes that we have as culture in terms of where we want to move, we've been able to achieve so much. I'll give you a few examples. In 1996, some people in the valley were able to convince the government to create a bioregional financing facility, Samantha and Tyler's work, and in compensation for some of the flooding that had happened when they built the dams. The government agreed. Today, that bioregional financing facility has a portfolio of $1.4 billion and gives around $100 million a year to the local community, both in benefit and in. So we live in a bioregion that has a highly functioning, probably very unique in the world, bioregional financing facility. Community also created a food co-op. In 2015 and 16, while I was on the board of the food co-op, we built what's today is the largest independently owned organic food co-op in Canada. To give you an example, there's 10,000 people that live in our town, our closest town, that's called Nelson, and the food co-op has 20,000 members. So we have a true local program. There's 140 businesses that sell to the co-op. So that's something else that happened here. We built co-housing communities in 2013, 2014. I built co-housing community. There's 86 people that live there permanently. There's homeschooling networks. There's I could go on and on and on. Some organizations were able to protect 24% of the land base in parks. which is double the average in British Columbia. So we really live in a place that has achieved so much good from the perspective of bioregional resiliency. And after 35 years of being here, if I was to give an assessment of where we are as a bioregion, really the money has found us. It's become gentrified. The people that actually build this community cannot afford to live in the community anymore. It is a place that's experiencing a lot of wildfires, a place that's experiencing a lot of smoke every summers. So we did that over 4 decades, and yet the true assessment is that we haven't necessarily moved the needle in the right direction. The reason I'm bringing these examples, those two examples, is because essentially, from my perspective, and I'm sure that most of you share that, the most fundamental human system that directs our choices and our capacity is our financial system. And unless we find a way to address this layer, I think that our challenges will keep compounding. And the focus, my personal focus of the last decade, of looking for what is that crack? Is there a similar crack that exists in our current system that we could slip through and create templates for a different way of for a different way for a different way that the financial system and the economy could become a force of regeneration, a force for good, a force for the future that we all want to build. And through the process of looking for that crack, I came across the special economic zone. The first time I touched it was in 1987. I was on my way to India, and we had a stopover in Dubai. I remember clearly at the time, I didn't quite realize what was going on, but I remember clearly looking out and seeing deserts in all directions and a few buildings in construction. And I was going, why would a place build an international state-of-the-art airport in the middle of the desert? And I later realized that the United Arab Emirates had, in a way, you can say they were futuristic. They had a sense as to where the future was heading, and they created special economic zones around Dubai to attract capital so that Dubai could become what it is today, one of the hubs of the world. At the time, there was really not much there, and it's quite astounding to see what's happened in Dubai over the last 40 years. I'm not saying that to say that the future is a bunch of Dubai all over the world. I'm just saying that they utilize special economic zones as the frame to be able to build what they were foreseeing the future was to become. I think we're at a time now where people that are futuristic can see that the future requires a new form of economy. And my sense at this time is the time where we could use the same crack in the system, i.e. a special economic zone, redefined as a regenerative economic zone, to begin to create templates of the future of economy. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with regenerative economic zone or with special economic zones, but they exist in most countries in the world. When you walk through an airport and you have if you go to the duty-free area, that's a small special economic zone of that country. Most countries have legislation for special economic zones, and what special economic zones allow is to redefine the rules of the game. You know, it allows it within the boundary of this particular zone within our nation state, we will allow to redefine the rules of the game. So the book that I'm writing is exploring the possibility of utilizing that crack to reinvent economy and create templates for the future of economy at scale. I think that unless we're able to give examples at scale, meaning millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people in millions of hectares of land, that show an economy that actually is regenerative, that actually makes people's life better, that regenerate the landscape, that increases the health and wellness of people. If we're able to demonstrate that at scale, then we may create a template that we need in order for that to scale beyond the boundaries of a regenerative economic zone. So it's, in a way, it's doing the same thing that we did here in the Valley with the tenure system in forestry, where we utilize a crack to get tenure. Once you have tenure, you're capable of doing things much quicker in terms of change, and then utilizing that same crack at a scale to be able to redefine economy. So that's the purpose of the book. That's the thing that I'd like to explore today. So maybe the next thing to talk about quickly before we go into more of an exchange is to look at what the special economic zone offer us that could be repurposed for a regenerative economic zone. I've got some principle, and the first one is like, because it's bounded, because a special economic zone is bounded, a regenerative economic zone could be bounded around a bioregion. You could choose bioregions around the world that are capable, ready, willing to host such an experiment within a bioregional boundary, and then and that would be the boundary of the regenerative economic zone. And inside that zone, there would be an explicit mandate for ecological and human well-being. Essentially, that would be flipping what we currently have, because most special economic zones are really trying to attract capital to win the current economic game. So as opposed to doing that, you utilize the regenerative economic zone to increase human and ecological well-being. And inside that zone, you could create a regenerative incentive architecture that essentially redefine what economy is. And we can talk about that through the Q&A part of it, but what does that mean to redefine an incentive structure from an economic standpoint? Obviously, it would require place-based governance. So how do you enter into agreement with nation states so that you can have place-based governance that fits within the context of a nation state? And that's a whole other exploration. And those are all the things that I go into in the book, but that would be another of the principles. Another one is within the regenerative economic zone, we would need to have a plural mode of exchange. Like we need to get away from our current tender system and be allowed to experiment with new forms of exchange, like mutual credit systems and tokenized economy, and how do we reorient economy to be future anchored as opposed to present anchored? How do we move the economy from where we are today to what our desired future conditions are? And how do we incentivize choices so that, how do we incentivize the system so that people's choices are aligned with our desired future conditions? I could go a lot into that, but I'll keep that for the conversation if we have time for it. And then we need to find a way for the restorative capital framework to that enters to find a new definition of what value is. How do we um, how do we redefine value for investors into the system so that the investment doesn't drive what's actually happening within the zone, but instead um, the investment portfolio that comes in is aligned with the desired future conditions of the zone, and which ties in with the transcendence of GDP as our measuring um, economic frame. You know, we need to move more towards a health and wellness um, frame and a restorative frame and a bioregional health frame. So those are kind of the seven base principles that I think are important inside this regenerative economic zone. And and just in closing, because I think that you were hoping for 25 minutes, eh, Tyler and Samantha? Just so I'm clear.
Wait, whatever's in flow stuff. Yeah, and you feel free to
Okay.
go a little bit longer. We've got till we've got 1 more hour together, so plenty of time.
Okay. Because I've had my timer here and I'm seeing that I'm at 23 minutes here. So and maybe I'll just close since my timer's telling me I should close. I'll trust the timer. The one thing that I found from our experience in the valley here is that the 8 years that we worked on proposals and solutions were key to us being able to walk through that crack when the crack came because we were ready. We had we had maps, we had visions, we had support, we had worked for so many years on imagining what the future might look like. And as soon as the crack appeared, we were able to walk through it because the work was done. And um, it would have been almost impossible to walk through that crack without that work being done ahead of time. Right now, we're experiencing a time where our world is very unstable. I think instability creates openings. I think those openings will show up. The current direction is to um, carry on the same game with more and more control at the top and less freedom at the bottom. And I think working on solutions that are ready for when the cracks appeared is part of the work. And I go back to Dubai, not because there's anything that they've done that I fully believe in, but you have to lift your hat to the people that were able to foresee the future in 1980 and create the structure and the incentive for people to walk through the crack when the world was moving in the direction they had foresee it was going to move into. I think the future is regenerative. I think the future is um, a new economy. I think the future is place-based. I think the future is bioregional. And I think we need to start working now on what that looks like so that when and if the crack appears, we are ready to walk through it. And my sense is that it will appear and it will appear fairly soon. Um, I haven't been always right about timing. My wife can attest to that. But one thing I've always been mostly been right about is the arc, and the arc of our evolution is towards a regenerative economy. So I think we need to work on that. That's my spiel for today.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you for your spiel. And we'll have a full hour here basically to get into dialogue. And so, for those of you who have been listening, if you have questions starting to germinate, feel free to type them in the chat. And it's always great for you to raise your hand with the little button on Zoom, or if you can't find that, just physically raise it in your camera and I'll try to find you. I'm going to moderate this next hour and just want to start with a request actually to everyone who's here that if it's available for you to come on camera, that just enriches the space. It just fills it with warmth and aliveness and the friendliness of humans in space together. And if that's not available for you, no pressure at all, just a warm request. And I'm going to kick it off with a question or two here, Steph, and then I'll call on folks in the order that I see you. Um, you spoke so beautifully, Steph, about the crack that emerged with your work in BC and that forestry work. And you spoke quite beautifully here about your sense of in increasing uncertainty, uh, the likelihood that those cracks will appear. And I'm sure it's pretty impossible to predict exactly how those cracks will appear, but I know you've done some thinking on kind of in the existing system as it operates, um, where might be places that have incentives to try this out? Because in the example of Dubai, the incentive there is to do the existing game faster, better, and attract more capital by changing the rules a little bit. Here, the game is changing the rules a lot to kind of operate a totally different economic and financial paradigm. And so I'm curious your thoughts on who would be attracted to trying this out and why, and maybe
Mhm.
where.
So it's a very, very good question. You know, my sense is that in a perfect world, hundreds of these will co-emerge. But in reality, if we had one or two locations around the planet that could really um, create a template that's as replicable and scalable, that would be most amazing. One chapter in the book is I really looked at the entire world, tried to anyways, and tried to assess all the locations and which ones have more likelihood of success than others. And the things that I used to do the assessment was, assessing place, obviously, first, what's the political and social context, the watersheds, the soil, the climate regime, and its trajectory, the energy geography, really looking at, what are those places that I think what's important for these examples to emerge is that because there's going to need to be such a both a nation state support and an international support that they represent valuable ecosystem types for the planet. So I often use the example of Ecuador and the Amazon. You can be in Norway and know that the Amazon is critical for your daily life. Um, and having a special economic zone or regenerative economic zone in Ecuador, and that protects millions of acres of the Amazon, you could see how easily that could get international support. And the international component of it is important because one of the aspects that I explore in the book is how do you tie debt relief to special economic zone and regenerative economic zone creation. So places that have not win the current economic game are more likely to be the ideal candidates. Uh, Places that are currently, it's the same as asking it's the same as asking a very wealthy person to let go of our current game. There's not many incentives because they're winning the game, and it's a much harder game to let go of if you're winning it. So people that are not winning the current economic game, nation states that are on the margins in a way, are probably more likely candidate. Um, but then you also need to assess the readiness, like what's the relational dimension, what's the culture like. Um, you know, it, it needs to arise from the place. It cannot be something that you go to and plunked on people. It needs to arise from the place itself. So what's the social readiness like? Are there organization in place that actually have the capacity to do a big lift like that? There's the legal dimension. Someone put in the comments. Some countries have clear limitations in their current legal framework, whereas other countries are have more wiggle room. Like a place like Belize, had a debt for nature, the blue something it was called, can't remember right now. But they already have legal frameworks within the country to do that. Same, Ecuador has a REZ framework or SEZ framework within their legislation. Costa Rica is a good one too. So there's different places around the world that would be easier. But for me, that doesn't mean that places like Canada, where the legal frame is very, very difficult, it doesn't mean that they're not ideal candidates. I think the 10-year system did not include community forests in BC in 1996 when we were working on what became a community forest here. Like working on the framework and waiting for the crack to happen. So we worked on a community forest framework in 1996. It became available in 2002. But when it became available, because we had done all the work, that suddenly we could utilize the framework. So I think as the world changes, and especially if there is successful templates in parts of the world that might be easier now, I think as the world evolves, these openings will be created. New legislation will appear, new possibilities will appear. So doing the work in your own bioregion right now, I don't think is a bad idea. Focusing globally on one or two examples, I think is very, very important though. It's very easy for the energy to dissipate with 37 different projects trying to happen everywhere. If everyone focus on let's do one in the Amazon because we have indigenous people there actually willing to do the lift, and how can we support them, then that could actually happen. The international support and the international commitment and the willingness is critical. So where is the ecology relevant for the planet? I think is a good key question for assessing, where those places can start.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I'm hearing in that a wonderful holding of the tension of the thinking on a global scale and kind of establishing design principles and overall architectures for this, while also knowing that it needs to come from community themselves and be attuned to those particularities and have leadership locally. So I love how you're holding that tension.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to start going to audience questions, and just a request that yeah, if you have something beyond just a question to offer, if you have a particular perspective, to try to share it briefly. We're not trying to open up the space here for 5-minute rants or wandering explorations, but would love just keeping things to the point and keeping the conversation flowing amongst many folks. So Claire, I'm going to go to you, and then Donna, you'll be next.
Thank you. I put in the chat a URL for the Timbuktu Collective in India, which is a cooperative of a bunch of small farming communities that, from your description, sounds like what you're talking about. I'd be curious. But my question, I was really picked up on what you said about all of your work currently has been gentrified. And I get really concerned about creating models that are alternatives to the current thing, which end up serving, the gentrified class. And I'm wondering if there's anything that we can build into the process, into the model that you've learned about in your experience to protect against that tendency to be absorbed and co-opted by the dominant economy.
Yeah, that's an important point. See, the reason I was bringing this up for this bioregion is that this bioregion was not a bounded bioregion. It was basically didn't have a membrane around it. And when there's no membrane around, and that's kind of what special economic zones allow for, in is creating membranes around physical spaces, and those physical spaces, because there was no membrane here, or the flow of incentives, the incentive of the world were basically translated into our bioregion. And the incentive of the world is that money captures goodness, that's kind of what it does. So it's attractive. It's a beautiful place. There's beautiful water. There's organic food. There's everything that you want. So if you have the money for it, that's a really beautiful place to move to. It makes sense in the world that we live in. And that's why if the zone has a different tenders, like I talked about, different economic logic, different orientation, different incentives, structures, I'm really talking about something that's quite radical. I'm basically saying that what we need to do is reimagine economy from first principle, like wipe the slate clean and reimagine economy from first principle. And, I could go into that, but from my perspective, it's a reverse engineering process. It's one that is anchored into the future. It's one that's anchored into our desired future conditions. Like our current economic system doesn't have a vision or a direction. It's a bunch of decisions being made by individuals all over the place, that's based on competition and growth. That's essentially the rules of the game. So those rules need to change foundationally, and they can only change in areas that are bounded for experimentation. And that's kind of what I propose a regenerative economic zone could actually do. So the people coming in as visitors, the people wanting to move to the regions, the people that are living there are then living under a different set of rules with different orientation. So it actually protects them from what you're worried about, Claire.
Just when clarifying a point on that stuff, it seems like there would be a way in which capital flowing into the region can't be extracted from or leave the region as financial returns are generated within that special economic zone. Is that right?
Well, redefining what return is part of the regenerative economic zone. So, like, there is an incentive within the frame for people to start seeing value in modeling the future, as opposed to seeing value in doubling the size of your yacht. But so there's a redefinition of what economy is for and what the direction of economy is geared towards. But yes, there is a impact investment flow that can come in, and there is a way for that impact investment to exit. It's there's an entire chapter in the book about just that. How do you move capital in, and then how does that capital can move out without changing the direction of the bioregion? And but I think it's beyond the scope of this conversation. But yes, absolutely, because we need support from the international community for something like that to happen. So it needs to include, needs to transcend and include, to use the famous integral lingo, so we need to include that component, but we also need to transcend it so it's utilized and it doesn't has the same level of impact. Capital doesn't impact what happens inside the zone. Capital help support what the zone has decided wants to happen.
Thank you.
Well said. Thanks, Steph. Okay. Thanks for that question, Claire. Over to you, Donna, and then Dan, you'll be next.
Okay. Hi.
Samantha, you guys can hardly be, I can hardly hear you guys. If you can increase your volume, that'd be great. Sorry.
Hi. Nice to see you, Stefan. It's been a few years since we met and had a conversation. And what I'm going to articulate is a little bit difficult to say, so bear with me a little bit. But I want to acknowledge the cracks, and I think we can all relate to that. I think we can also all relate to a vision that is a world that is life affirming, regenerative. And we're all on the same page around that, no doubt. When we met a few years ago, you were staying a bit quiet and under the radar. And at the time, I think, I was eager to see you kind of come out a little more. And it looks like now you are kind of coming out loud and proud around some stuff. I've gone in the opposite direction a little bit. And so what I'm going to raise here is more in a spirit of inquiry that I would encourage us just to keep open as best we can, that we're not going to wrestle these things to the ground in this conversation. It's just to keep these things, I guess, open. We often talk about the patterns that have been ingrained over, say, 50 years. But what's been happening around, that's shaking the ground beneath my feet, and I'd love to discuss this further at some point if you want, is that these patterns go back to the beginning of human civilization history. This goes way back. And so some of the work that I've been engaged in is extremely humbling. For all our talk about human exceptionalism, there's still this tendency for those in taking on roles of leadership to kind of direct and guide and architect and come up with the new model. And so a danger that I'm seeing, and there's a lot more to all of this, is that the more we articulate these and try to create a new ledger, when these things become legible, and I appreciated the vulnerability and the fragility you're speaking to. I think we all feel that. The more we bring these things out and try to define them in ways that they become legible, they become more susceptible to that very configuration that we're all entrapped in. So the really humbling, and so I really appreciate you using language like might and hopefully and maybe and all of that. And we know that there's many of these efforts underway in the world. You're not alone with this. There's like a lot of this stuff that's going on. It's all going to happen anyway. So I'm not by any means saying to people, oh, stop, you're all wrong. It's more from the standpoint of it's a very different configuration that I think we need to be mindful of, that we've been living in a world as if it doesn't exist. And it is one that brings in the sacred feminine in a way, that might birth transformation. Because I don't believe, from what I've been coming to understand, that we can produce and generate transformation and that we can generate our way to regeneration. So it's the spirit of life that is being squelched and squashed. I'm going to stop there. I've already gone too long. I do apologize. It's really hard. But just to open that up, check. Enough.
Yeah, it's such a mystery, this human life, and the seeing what we're seeing and knowing that there's something so simple. The reorientation is actually quite simple internally, and the translation of that reorientation into a physical reality is fraught with challenges and minefields. And the journey between, for me, ultimately, it's a spiritual journey that we're on altogether, and it's much deeper than systems and economy. I feel like the way that I experience the future, and we can have a conversation outside this conversation, but just briefly on your comment, is the way that I experience life is that the future is always speaking to us, there's like something that exists in the moment that is, brings us a connection to that, and that wants to emerge. It wants to emerge in us collectively, individually. It wants to express itself on the planet. And so what I'm trying to do with this is like almost like tapping into a future. I know that the likelihood of it happening, given the forces that are not necessarily wanting this to happen on this planet at this time, is small. But there's something about. Sometimes I say I write that book so I don't have to think about it anymore. It's something that's kind of knocking at the door and wants to be expressed in some form or another. But I agree with you, like as soon as you cement something, or you try to define something, or you try to you know show it as a finality or a way forward or something like that, you tend to cage it in its potential expression. So I try to keep that alive and real in what I'm presenting, and it's a humble offering to our conundrum that we're experiencing. Yeah.
Thanks, Steph, and thanks, Donna, for the thoughtful question and yeah, all that you brought with it. Appreciate it. Dan, over to you, and then we'll go to Stuart.
Great. Thank you very much. Hi, Stephan. This is a great introduction, and thank you, Samantha and Tyler, for making all of this happen. And you guys have been a godsend to my journey. And I loved your perspective just now, saying about what is wanting to come through, because I feel like I'm riding a river of cultural evolution, not trying to to initiate the river. It's already happening. I'm just trying to get in it and not get capsized. So, and that tension between progressivism and conservatism is kind of the way I see it ever since I was a kid. So that's great. I have some very specific questions about forming regenerative economic zones. And you brought up two parameters that have been on my mind continuously. One was the ecological degradation. And of course, the other, which is almost implicit in that, especially in foreign countries or in the Amazon or Ecuador, like you mentioned, is the economic condition of the people in that bioregion. And then you alluded to becoming gentrified in Southwest BC, which I never imagined could happen. But I moved from San Diego to Sonoma County 10 years ago and oversee compost coalitions here, but now part of a bioregenerative development group here. And I was just looking at what are the wealthiest counties in California. And so I'll come back to that in a second. But and so I'm wondering how you deal with that, because Sonoma County is about half as wealthy in terms of median household income as Southeast Marin County. And then the richest counties in our state are San Mateo and Santa Clara, of course, Silicon Valley. So, but Sonoma has half the median income of our county just to the south of us. But we are very rich in resources. And of course, we have the wine industry here, which is the big economic engine. But the wine industry is flagging. The timber industry has already come and gone. So I'm wondering how my basic fundamental question is, do you work with county level economic development zones economic development boards as part of the development of an a regenerative development zone? Very tactical question.
Well, the idea of a regenerative economic zone is that you define a territory And then within that territory, everyone inside it is participating in the regenerative economic zone in some form or another. So someone that lives in Dubai right now is somewhat participating into the special economic zone. So if there is 12 county within a regenerative economic zone that's been defined, then the 12 county would be involved in the process and the journey towards the implementation of it. I think the critical component from my perspective of a regenerative economic zone is that because you have multiple tenders and because you can actually begin to re-incentivize economy towards a desired future condition, a future that you want as a collective, then you are allowed to control the currency aspect within the zone. So you can actually print currency that incentivize the direction that you're hoping to achieve within your zone. So it's actually you're re-empowering the creation of money from the source. The origin of money was really a trade, a way for people to trade with each other. At the time, the planet seemed infinite. There was no end to it. And, I think now that we understand that we live on a finite planet, we've met the limits, so we can actually reimagine an economy that is both trade but has direction to it, that actually is incentivized towards restoration, towards a mother staying at home with her child for the first 3 years can be incentivized because we know that long-term health of the kid is going to increase. We can, like, a lot of these things can be incorporated within the economic frame that changes economy completely. It really reimagines economy essentially, and that's kind of the basic idea here. So yes, county level would definitely be, the areas need to be large enough to be an economy, if and that's why from my perspective, we're looking at large areas. I don't think California is necessarily a place that would welcome it, because it definitely is currently winning the game in many ways. But every time that people are feeling the challenges of the climate challenges that we're feeling bioregionally differently, and all of us in some form, there is for me, there's an opening for creativity that emerges from the tension of feeling daily life that has become less comfortable than it used to for most people.
Yeah, I agree. California, of course, is a progressive environmental state, and I work in that industry. So it's water. It's also farm workers, and disadvantaged communities exist all over California. Mostly, I mean, even here in Sonoma County, we have a disadvantaged community that are farm workers on the wineries. So I think starting there, and of course, they're a Hispanic community as well. So we're bilingual already. So I think in California, we definitely have a strong push, but we also have that strong pushback that you already
Sure.
mentioned.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's really helpful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. We'll go to Stuart and then Tricia and then Madison, and then I'll try to summarize some of the questions that I've been seeing in the chat.
Yeah, well, thank you, Stephan, and Samantha, and Tyler. Thanks so much. This idea of some sort of investment zone has been strongly on my mind. I'm not from America, as some of these people are. I live in Northwest Wales, and it strikes me that there are two things that are worthwhile sharing, really. One is that we have a number of these statutory zones within our frameworks, and these obviously have things like tax breaks and simplified regulations and financial incentives, and these come with things like, well, we have growth of AI data centers areas, for example. We're going to have 3 small modular nuclear reactors that are going to be built. We also have free ports, and there's a free port 20 miles away from me. All of these come with all of those things. They come with the regulation stuff. They come with the financial incentives, and they come with the tax breaks. The cracks here, though, are from a multi-capital perspective. And so you read everything that they're talking about, and actually the benefits that they're trying to share are the same benefits that we would want to see. So this is jobs and rural resilience and a green transition and so on. And so the first thing it says, through a statutory approach, that there are already cracks, and whether there is the possibility to tag on is the first thing. I look at that and I go, hey, rather than reinvent the wheel, what's the opportunity here to join with? Because they have already created the statutory conditions for such a zone to happen. And I think that the multi-capital mapping is a really good way of starting. Yeah, so this is something that we've gently explored so far. I think deeper when they are being proposed, or being scoped, then there is an even greater opportunity to get in with inside that blueprint. So I think that's the sort of the first thing. And yeah, there was a lot of positivity when we've spoken to our regional growth region. For example, so this is half a dozen local authorities that come together. We have 4 of these in Wales, and they're very supportive of the ability to be able to do this. The second then is how you might do a non-statutory mimic. So then you can actually then start to look at conditions that mimic things like the tax breaks and so on, but in a non-statutory way. So I just want to share that there are, and I've just seen that you're doing this work, Stephan. So yeah, thank you very much. But it just struck me that these are really important considerations. I just wanted to share, and maybe we could take some conversation outside of this call to explore a bit further.
Great. Thanks, Stuart. Yes. I go back and forth and is there a way to work with the current system and then tweak it in the right direction? I just came back from Switzerland. That's definitely an area of the world where, a lot of good things are happening, but it's also a lot of good things are happening because they are the big winners of our current economic game. So they have a lot of capacity to, within that frame to do certain things. But, if they were not hosting the capital of the world, and if they were not being the main holder of gold and all that kind of stuff, it would be much more challenging for them to do that within our current economic system. So there is, but that's how you find the cracks. You engage with the system, you engage with what's actually happening, you engage with the current regulations, you try to tweak the system to some degree, and eventually there might be an ability for a deeper examples to emerge out of these cracks that you're seeing, Stuart, right now. The reason I brought up our bioregion here is I felt like so much of that was happening. We had so much momentum here, and then ultimately the capital finds a way to utilize its current incentive to move whatever looks good on paper today in the direction that 5-10 years from now you might feel is actually moving away from what you had hoped and imagined. So that's kind of the risk factor of it, but that doesn't mean that engagement is not valued or important. And yeah. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. Please keep us posted as you follow that process in Wales. I think that could be an interesting case study for others to learn from, Stuart.
Sure, we will do.
Yeah, we'd love to stay in touch on that. Over to you,
happy
Tricia.
to chat outside of this conversation, Stuart, too.
That'd be great. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Over to you, Tricia, and then Madison.
Okay, thanks, Tyler, and thanks, Steph. Yeah, so I'm calling in from, I feel like one of those bioregions, that's like super special because it represents 2.5% of the Earth's biodiversity in a very small area of land. One of the things, too, that's interesting here is that we have a brand new municipality. So this place has just become a municipality over the last 2 years. And we have no planned regular door. So there's no planning of anything. And that, of course, has helped to create, a lot more destruction as gentrification has increased in development, and also the agenda of the national government towards increased tourism and higher kind of economic development in that level. So I'm just curious about these, because I know I've seen the special economic zones in other areas of the country, which obviously are set up specifically around, business as usual, if you will. But I'm curious, like, if we have, more of a chance of a willing municipality, which we do, but then we actually have a federal government that would not be there at all, and they're more running the show. And then you also mentioned the international community. So I'm just trying to kind of piece together how those different parts interact, or who's the prime players.
Where the crack lies.
Yeah, where the crack lies. Where do you live, Trisha? I didn't hear at the beginning.
I live on the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. It's interesting because in the book I explore 7 bioregions of the planet that I think are the best candidate, and Osa Peninsula is one of the 7. So it definitely is, a prime location. And again, that's the same thing you see, like a lot of capital is moving into Costa Rica. A lot of incentive for development, a lot of, and Costa Rica is bounded because it works within the frame of the world economy. It's like as soon as capital finds what you have there, which is very, very special, it does what it does. This is what it is. This is our current frame. Like growth is imperative. Consumption is imperative. Like that's the economy that we live in globally. So and that's where, and because you've got 2.5% of biodiversity of the planet, that's something similar to the Amazon in a way. It's one of those locations on the planet where you have, there is incentive for the rest of the world to protect those of peninsula in some form or another. People can easily understand that 2.5% of the biodiversity of the world is important. So you've got that component. You have a strong local community that's, quite coherent, which is already a component. You have a very strong co-op movement, that exists in Costa Rica. You already have a government that's protected, 25% of their land base. It has multi-layered possibilities that exist. But if the government doesn't get the advantage from their vantage point of creating a bounded region that actually becomes the template for the future of humanity, if they're not able to see that, then it's going to be hard for that to happen. So the question is, how do you begin to assemble a vision within a certain bioregion that actually becomes compelling enough? That's why I used the Dubai example. When I was talking to the, ex-minister of finance of Ecuador, I was basically saying, if you're ahead of the curve of what's coming eventually, we need a regenerative economy. We have no choice. Otherwise, we're going to collapse our ecosystem to such a degree that it actually would endanger our life as humans. So if you're a decade ahead of where we're heading, if you're the first one out of the gate, you become the one that will benefit the most in the long term from creating the templates, because then your template can replicate, you can be, so there is a lot of advantages to actually be willing to be like the guy in Dubai that said, let's build an airport there was, somehow needed to get support to build the thing, and there was nothing around the airport. So there was someone somewhere that was visionary enough to say, if you do that, then this and this and this is going to happen. So we need to find leaders and people that are, nation state leaders. We need support from, the people holding the debt, and basically saying, this is the future. You got to see this is the future. We need to create a template somewhere, and that template can become, so I think there's a lot that could be done. We cannot go into full strategy here, but there is a strategic approach to taking where you are as a bioregion and actually creating a vision that's compelling enough, that's supported enough, that then becomes exciting enough for the leadership, and that also becomes exciting enough. And sometimes you need the international support before you get the nation state support, and sometimes the nation state brings you the international support, but that's the level that we're talking at here. We're talking about like, we need the World Bank on board, and Samantha will say, well, maybe it's not going to happen, but we need that level of engagement because it is a planetary challenge.
Thank you, Tricia. Thanks, Steph. Over to you, Madison.
Hi. Thanks for taking the time to chat. So I am situated in Maryland right now. I have my master's in economics and have always been interested in the climate, but have done advocacy and community organizing outside of my paid job. And I'm curious if you have advice for people who are really interested in building this new world, right? Or in finding the cracks and building off of there. What words of encouragement or advice do you have? Because in the US, right, in our current political environment, it's not economically feasible to have your career in this kind of work. But I do think that that is where I'm called to be. And I'm just so happy that I found this call. I don't even know how it came into my inbox, but I've been looking for people who want to be at the intersection of funding, creating this new world. So I feel like I found my people somehow. But yes, I'm curious, any words of encouragement, especially in this current environment?
Yeah, Madison, thanks for the question. Essentially, there's two things. For one thing, don't quit your job. I won't recommend that at the onset, but I feel like we need to allow ourselves to at least spend some time every day outside the box. It feels like the system that we're in is like, fish swimming in water. We don't realize that we're part of it because it's so everywhere, and it encompasses so much of our daily choices and what we do and how we do it, and we spend our time and all that.
Yeah.
But finding moments that you can really step out, and these calls are beautiful for that. They allow you to expand and see beyond the daily conversations, and then meeting the people that are there, thinking in those ways, and then building community and starting to explore those ideas.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think we're all there's something in our souls that we came to this earth at this time for a certain reason, and there's something in our souls that's calling us into action. That's why we're here, and it's all different for each of us, and but seek, inquire, that's my guiding principle in life. Like, the more I know that I don't know, then the more I walk through life asking questions, the more things are revealed to me, and when things are revealed to me, I need to know that I don't know. So it's like, so it's a circle in a way, and it's humbling, and it demands that you show up every day. And I think if you trust that little bit that brought you onto this call, and you just let that grow, then it's just going to grow in your life. And that's what came for me to share with you right now.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steph. That's so beautiful. And Madison, we're glad you're here. And we have an online community of practice that has a map feature. So you can find people that are interested in this work around where you live. And that's always a good place too, to just gather with like-minded people that care about your place and want to take better care of that place together and then listen to what is yours to do. Tyler?
Yeah, right on. I want to ask a bit of a synthesis question from some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat, which some of them are highly specific about, in US law, what might some of these cracks be? And given some of the experiments we're seeing with more of the tech community around different sorts of crypto states or network states, there's kind of another fringe, I guess, that's iterating on these ideas with perhaps a slightly different vocabulary or value set. And so I think without trying to get into the weeds of all those different jurisdictions and possibilities, I'm just curious, Steph, for you in your life and this work at this stage, how do you imagine in wanting to steward this work or be in collaborative relationship with folks after the book comes out? Do you have a sense that you yourself are wanting to be kind of a knowledge hub for all this to help people who are working on this around the world convene? I know that's generally a part of the theory here is that these zones need to be in dialogue and a mutual learning process with each other. And, we hold that same philosophy with the bioregional financing facility approach. And so just curious, yeah, what do you see as your work to do in the coming years around this? And as people have more questions or have insights as they're chipping away at this, how can that knowledge be stewarded well and decentralized?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Yeah, I'm like I said to for on the screen there, but I lost her. And like I said to the lady I was just speaking before, Madison. I, I it feels like this is something that's coming true that's important, and that's why it feels like I told Donna that there's there's meaning behind the process of putting it out there, and and then I'm very open to, like I said, like you said, Samantha, on my bio, like I've been really focused on embodiment my whole life, like getting beyond ideas to actually implementing things. That's why work on food co-ops and work on community forestry and fish habitat restoration. Like it's always been about how do we translate our inspiration into real physical representation of what we believe is possible. So I'm feeling that around this work, and so essentially I'm open. That's kind of where I sit with it. I feel like the next step is to put it out there and then look, if it touches someone somewhere that really feels this is where this is what we need to work on, and then absolutely willing to team up with all and any of you to make it reality. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. At the same time, I really have a sense that like needs to emerge. Like if you look at a place like Prospera, which fits into the category of what you just mentioned, Tyler, it's a crypto project in Honduras that is trying to do adjacent similar something. It emerged from the outside in, and I think that REC needs to emerge from the inside out, and so it needs to come from place. It cannot be a bunch of people dropping in and saying this is what we envisioned for your and now they're in court and in Honduras because the people so for me it's very important that we're stewarding something that's emerging from place, and So, and there's some places in the world that I believe are the perfect candidates for that. And I'm so glad that someone from HOSA was here today, because I really feel that's one of the places on the planet that can happen. But it needs to emerge from place, So I'm definitely willing to work with the people in the location for it to truly emerge from place. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Steph.
Thanks, Steph. I hope we have time for both Michael and Richard. And so, Michael, just an invitation to come off mute and try to keep your question brief if you can.
Sure. And I'll even come on camera. How's that?
That's great.
Hello. Great to see everyone here. So many faces that I did not expect to re-encounter. First, I'd like to clap up vigorously. Thank you for bringing the story. I was trained as an economist and a technologist, and I get so wrapped up in the contractual or the fixed ways in which transactions in such an economic language is codified that I forget there are mechanisms for flexing in new and interesting ways, to play the games in new ways. And so that was an important re-expansion of imagination that I'm super glad that not only you're telling, but that Samantha and Tyler spotlighted for the rest of us to kind of remember, oh yeah, there are ways of doing this. Second is that there are games that people are playing, and Metachrysalis I put in the chat is one that is in the space of bioregionalism, playing a game of what does it mean for groups to form and reimagine. And they're going in many different directions, but the authors of that game could be encouraged to bring a module about form your own economic zone and help people that were so interested to kind of build facility in that direction. But I'm not sure she's still here. Someone in the group brought to my attention recently a new grammar. And this is one of the things that in economics, we have a fixed grammar that sometimes needs to be recalibrated. And the new grammar that she used, and someone may be offended, is enshittification. And what she was referring to was the way in which the marketplace tends to grab and enclose the commons. And in technology groups, there's been a kind of accelerating of disrupting management practices, like at the World Bank, when I was there, and probably when Samantha was there were 5-year plans, and then Agile came along, and it was like, how do you change the management mindset, not to compress everything into a 5-year plan now into 3 weeks, but to really remanage, replay that game differently, and that this same kind of thing is going on with the relationship between these knowledge commons and these intellectual property and transactionalism, and the existing rules that exist in the world, and how to push back between them. So I think it's a very fertile topic for future delving in. And that, as someone who's here in DC and working to kind of find co-schemers, I thought if we were to try and build an economic zone, there's still a missing piece. I pointed to these other two pieces, but there's still a piece that I've not cracked, and that I'd be curious to put in front of. And that was in your story where you said you became a legal entity that was able to then add tenure. And this idea of who has legal standing to act on behalf of a larger intention and then become shepherd is not trivial at all. And I'm finding that the idea of who receives the money, if there's a lot of money, everybody talks about all this money we want to put into this, but who receives it? Is there a reservoir that gets formed? Is there an individual group? And creating organizational structures that can receive pools and then recirculate them more widely. And I know I've talked a lot, so I'll stop there. But that's an important point, at least from where I stand in the world, to really get some more love and innovation. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. A few things I'll mention quickly. Make sure that there's time for Richard also. The way we formed our co-op, like the 10-year older in the Slocan Valley is a co-op, and the way that we formed the co-op is that if to be a member of the co-op, you have to drink the water from the land that we're managing, so that and all the profits that co-op makes is returned to the community. So that's kind of our guiding principle in terms of organizational structure. So everyone has a link. One thing we found is that people have different political beliefs. People have different views on forestry. People have different ways of perceiving the world. But everyone drinks water, and water is actually something that everyone cares about. Everyone's tied to. So by making water central to organizational structure, it actually becomes a link that is very easy for people to agree on. So that's kind of what we did. The other thing around changing the lingo around economy, I think is so important for us to realize that the system that we're living in, especially the current growth imperative that's debt-based, our current economic system, is something that doesn't have to be. It's something that we humans have created. It is something that is, in existence because we've created it. And the moment that you realize that, actually this is not something I'm swimming in, it's something that I can look at as an object, and because I can see it as an object, it's something that I can shift, it changes everything. Most of the time we try to find ways to tweak inside something which is misoriented, and really what the call is here is to realize that this is something that could be erased and reimagined, and of course it cannot be erased and reimagined everywhere at once, but it can be erased and reimagined within bounded spaces, and then it can scale and replicate. So that's the that's the relanguaging that I want to put forward, is it's really because it's a system, because it was created, it can be reinvented.
Thank you, Steph. Richard, I'm going to get to you in a second, assuming Steph also has a couple more minutes. But just for those who do need to hop right now, I want to ask you one quick question, Steph. I know you said you weren't great at predicting timelines in the future, but I'm curious if you have a sense of when the book will be available. There's many curious folks who want to know.
Well, let me see, it's July now. It started in January, so I was hoping to be done by April, so I'm already off timeline. I'm shooting right now for October.
That sounds good.
Yes.
I'm glad we got a sneak preview. And
yes, you guys are one of the few that can read it and give me critics of everything, so I have to rewrite the whole thing from scratch.
And I dropped the link to the SANE website here, and folks can sign up for your newsletter. Is that the best place for them to get notified when the book is out?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll let you know. You'll let them know.
Yeah.
But yeah, sign up on our website. That'd be great.
Great. Well, wonderful. If you have to hop right now, please feel free. But I do want to give it over to Richard for one last question. And we put a bunch of links.
Miriam, can you put my email in the chat?
Thanks, Miriam. We put a bunch of links, including some information on our next deep dive, which will be on September 2nd. We're going to have Leon Seafield here from Dark Matter Labs, who's been deep in a lot of the bioregional financing facility work in Europe. And us as the BioFi project have really kept our main attention on the Americas. And so we're excited to check in with Leon here in the community of practice to hear about their insights and learnings and development and kind of share across the ocean. So that's it for us. But Richard, over to you for the final question.
I appreciate that so much. I know we're running out of time here. Steph went right into what I was going to speak to as he speaks about the cracks. It's such a critical idea to keep in mind and keep working toward. And here it's water. We're in the mid-Atlantic. I think and grown up in the Hudson River Valley. We barely anybody lost the Hudson River Valley. Here we have Delaware water basin, which is very, very significant that we haven't lost, but it's precarious. We've been trying to work with the various headwaters of the tributaries. Just last week, we lost 93 criticals. $25 million to buy the land out from under the preservation that was going on. And that's the type of thing we're trying to hold on to long enough for the understanding that water is the key here. It's actually all over the US, but it's becoming, even here in the Mid-Atlantic, a critical issue for a variety of reasons. So I think of the Delaware River water basin, all its tributaries. I also think of the Chesapeake Bay and the fact that Madison is in Maryland. She probably has an idea about that too. So that's all I wanted to add. We keep working on it for 50 years, just try to hold on long enough for those cracks to become obvious enough that something is done about it. So that's it. Thank you very much for that opportunity and your ideas, Steph and Tyler.
Thank you,
Richard.
Appreciate it.
Just one little thing on Richard. Yeah, I really believe watershed boundaries are the best natural boundaries to utilize when you're looking at, REZ creation is like, what are the watershed boundaries that exist? And, people that live within watershed boundaries actually feel a relationship to the land that's connected to those boundaries. So it actually makes complete sense.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you for your perseverance and sharing about your experience. And thanks to Steph for sharing all his wisdom, and Miriam for all of her wisdom cultivation that we are benefiting from through Steph and his storytelling. And thanks to all of you who came today. Tyler and I are getting married in 3 weeks, so we won't have a community of practice call in August, but we'll be back in September.
We were thinking for some time that we were going to do a Zoom wedding and invite the BioFi community of practice, but we opted against that.
We're getting married on a beautiful permaculture farm here outside of Asheville, and it's our biggest event we're producing yet. So we'll be directing some of our attention to that over the next month.
Thanks for being here. Feel free to come off.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for coming. Blessings.